There isn't a single medium out there that showcases trauma better than anime. And you don't have to go any further than Re:Zero to see how good we have it. Because each time Subaru, the protagonist, dies and comes back to life, he has to live with the memories of every single thing that happens in each timeline. And no one around him remembers. The sheer isolation of being the only one who knows tears him apart. Or what about Mushoku Tensei, a reincarnation story where Rudeus has to constantly come to grips with what a terrible human being he was. And those memories often get in the way of him having a second shot at life. But even in the face of these two giants and so many other good shows, Classroom of the Elite handles trauma in a way I've never seen before. Because rather than asking the question of how do you tackle your demons, it asks the question of who you are when you don't even know you have demons. How trauma can influence every single part of your life without you even knowing it. Because from the beginning, Ai Koji is a strange lead to follow. A character's monologues often give us glimpses into their past. We get to know things about our hero that no one else does. But Ai Koji barely ever gives us the chance because his mind is running at 1,000. Because while on the surface Ai Koji looks like this, the complete embodiment of monotone, in his head he's registering every single detail around him. Who's standing where, who's talking to who's doing what. Things that us as normal people, we would never think about twice. It goes so far that he remembers every single word of every single conversation. And Kushida, one of the first people Ai Koji meets, is a great example of that. Ai Koji notices that Kushida is trying to deceive him by piecing together clues from their first two conversations, proving that he's paying enough attention to know where Kushida messed up. I have a whole video on this if you want more details, and I'm just gonna link that down below. And this is fantastic storytelling, show, don't tell. The books show us how locked in Ai Koji is with his surroundings. And it's the first part of his personality we notice that's completely shaped by his traumatic past. Because his hyperfixation is less than innocent. Because before arriving at the school, Ai Koji spent his life in the White Room, an institution tasked with equalizing the abilities between the talented and the talentless, by providing a level of education never seen before, and so the monkey's paw curled. Because the scientists in there would literally do whatever it takes, no matter the human cost. And while experimenting on abandoned children, the lead scientist Suzaku made a terrifying discovery. That if he pushed the children to the limits of terror, their sense of fear would eventually go away, allowing for a level of focus that even adults couldn't match. So the White Room began its operations with this philosophy in mind, using fear as the primary motivator. Crying children within the White Room were never held because it was important for the children to know that no one was ever coming to save them. Survival became the only goal, and that word by itself is interesting. Because normally survival means to live, but within the White Room it only meant one thing: to stay. Because from the very beginning, it was drilled into the children's minds that leaving the White Room is a fate worse than death. That leaving was a rejection of everything that they are. And it wasn't hard to convince them because the children only knew the small world. And their place in it was constantly challenged through competition. If your results are bad, you leave the White Room, which means your metaphorical death. The competition was intense, but more importantly, it was unpredictable, putting the children in a constant state of fight or flight. As Ai Koji puts it, fighting in absurd and disadvantageous situations was drilled into him since he was a child. And now you see the reason behind Ai Koji's hyperfixation. He's not just a keen observer. In fact, he doesn't have a choice. The White Room marked Ai Koji with a mind that looks for danger no matter where he is. Ai Koji may be in a more normal environment than the White Room, but his mind is still stuck there. He's always looking for threats, not trusting a single person. When his teacher Sai explains the rules, he can't help but look for contradictions. Whenever strangers approach him, he can't help but doubt their intentions. He even catches himself analyzing situations that don't call for it, wondering why he can't stop. The answer escapes him because the trauma is etched so deep in his mind he can't even tell what's wrong. Because feeling like he's in danger is normal to him. That's how he's lived his entire life. But there is more here when we move away from what Ai Koji thinks to what he wants. From the beginning, Ai Koji paints himself as a reluctant hero. He wants a peaceful life, but he's dragged into trouble. But if you look deeper, Ai Koji is a willing participant. There's so many times he can back out, but he doesn't. And the gap between what he says he wants and what he actually does can be explained through a rare moment of reflection. Ai Ainakoji explains that the reason he's here is because the creator of the White Room, his father, can't reach him here. His father wants him in the White Room, and Ainakoji wants freedom. But not too long ago, it was the exact opposite. Within the White Room, there are specialists, and Shiro was one of them, the best martial artist. However, Ainakoji, with his innate ability to learn and adapt to any circumstance, soon overshadowed him. And in their very last conversation, Shiro shares that he wants freedom, so he's gonna drop out of the White Room. Remember, every child is conditioned to think that leaving the White Room means death. So Ainakoji couldn't understand why Shiro wants to leave, because one of the other things that made Ainakoji unmatched within the White Room was his infinite curiosity. The man wanted to know anything about everything, and the White Room afforded him that chance. But now, years later, the situation is completely flipped, with Ainakoji valuing freedom over the White Room. Why? There's a scene that comes to mind where Ainakoji has to make an important decision. He can abandon the people he met at the school and live a peaceful, normal life. Or he can help out his friends but risk being dragged into the spotlight. And right before he makes his decision, he recalls words that have nothing to do with the scene, that only a fool wouldn't use his innate abilities. Words more meaningful than he lets on. A line that's lived rent-free in his head for over a decade, because it was the day Ainakoji learned his limits. At one point in the White Room, Ainakoji realized that he was the undisputed best, and the higher he scored on the exams, the more kids were cut. But he didn't want them to leave because he could observe them to learn even more. That's the type of twisted environment the White Room was. So he deliberately tanked his score to keep the other kids enrolled, but his father noticed and questioned him. And the scene reveals a fundamental difference between Ainakoji and his father. The reason Ainakoji liked the White Room is because he was able to satiate his infinite curiosity. But to his father, the White Room was nothing more than a tool to gain political power. However, that day, no matter how badly Ainakoji outmaneuvers his father in the conversation, it didn't matter. Ainakoji learned that within the White Room, his father's orders are absolute. His logic has no place here. It was also the day Ainakoji realized that he really did not like this man, that he hated his father. And his father ends the conversation with a piece of advice, that those who don't use their powers are foolish. And now, years later, Ainakoji comes back to these words with his own answer, that maybe he is a fool. And by calling himself a fool, Ainakoji rejects his father, and by extension, his philosophy, because this indecision later comes back to bite him. Horikita even questions that Ainakoji keeps saying that he wants a peaceful life, but why does he keep on meddling? And it leads to another moment of self-reflection where Ainakoji admits that he knows himself well, that he's foolish, he's defective, but more than anything else, he knows that he's a horrible human being. And he says this within the first few episodes. Nothing he has done so far would warrant that label, because this line isn't an objective measure of reality, but Ainakoji admitting the ugly truth, that no matter how much he hates his father, they're cut from the same cloth, that they would sacrifice anything and anyone if it meant saving themselves, that his father's philosophy was forever etched into his mind by the White Room, that he can hate his father all he wants, but he can never deny that they are one and the same. And Ainakoji's actions aren't in service of his own freedom, far from it, but it's a way to get back at his father. Because Ainakoji admits the only way he can think of hurting a powerful man like that is to defy his orders and come to this school. That's why when Ainakoji's father arrives months later demanding his expulsion, Ainakoji hits him with the satisfying words that his orders are only valid within the White Room, and he has no reason to listen to him anymore. And this is what makes Ainakoji such an interesting protagonist, because the character chasing freedom the most is actually the one stuck deepest in a prison of his own trauma.